Hey there, deep divers.
Mhm.
We're going deep today. We are diving into Thinking in Systems by Donella Meadows.
Yeah.
It's a book that I think aims to equip you with like a whole new framework for seeing the world.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to kind of untangle how things really work from the simple systems you bump into every day
Right.
to those big, massive global systems that shape our lives.
It's about going beyond just observing and going into truly understanding how things are connected and what makes them tick.
Right. I'm ready to have my mind blown.
Okay.
Let's start with the basics.
Okay.
What exactly is a system anyway? Not just a bunch of random stuff, right?
Definitely not.
Yeah.
Meadows defines a system as a set of things that are interconnected and organized to achieve a specific goal.
Okay.
Think of a team
Okay.
working together towards a shared objective.
Okay, so like a basketball team.
Yes.
You got your players, you got your coaches,
Mm.
you got a playbook,
You got the rule.
all those individual
Yes.
parts. But what makes them a system is how they interact, how they pass the ball, how they strategize and work together to hopefully win the game.
Exactly. Meadows actually uses the example of a tree.
Okay.
You've got the roots, the trunk, the branches, the leaves all working together to help the tree grow, capture sunlight, and reproduce.
Okay.
It's the purpose and those connections that make it a system,
Okay.
not just a pile of wood.
So purpose is key.
Yeah.
It's what gives the system its direction, its reason for being.
Mm-hmm.
Does she give any other examples that might be relatable?
She talks about a university,
Okay.
which I think we can both relate to.
Yeah.
You've got students, professors, administrators, buildings, libraries overflowing with information.
Mhm.
But it's the interactions between them, the flow of knowledge, the rules, the degree requirements, all those elements working together that truly define the university as a system.
So a key takeaway here, and I'm writing this down,
Okay.
systems are more than the sum of their parts.
Yes.
It's not just about the individual pieces. It's
Yeah.
about how they come together and interact to create something bigger.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And that's where it gets really interesting because systems can behave in ways that might surprise us.
Yeah.
They can be resilient, bouncing back from disruptions,
Yeah.
or they can self-organize, evolving and adapting over time.
Okay.
And they do this through those intricate feedback loops that connect everything.
Okay, let's talk about those feedback loops.
Okay.
That's where we get into stocks, flows, and all that good stuff.
Right. Stocks are the elements you can see and measure.
Okay.
Think of the water in a bathtub that's a stock.
Okay.
Flows are the rates of change, like the water flowing in from the faucet
Okay.
or draining out.
I can see where this is going.
Yes.
The bathtub analogy, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Meadows uses that to explain how stocks and flows work together.
She does. And it helps illustrate how delays within a system can really throw things off.
Oh.
Imagine you're trying to get the bath to a certain level. You open the drain, water flows out, but then you realize it's draining too quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So you turn on the faucet, but there's a delay before the water starts filling the tub back up. If you're not careful, you might overshoot and then end up with a flood on your hands.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
So delays are those sneaky little things that make systems behave in unpredictable ways.
Yes.
And then there are those feedback loops, the things that control the flow based on the stock levels.
Yeah,
Are those what helps systems self-regulate?
exactly. You have two basic types. Balancing loops and reinforcing loops. A balancing loop tries to keep things stable.
Okay.
Think of the thermostat in your house.
Okay.
It kicks on the heat if the room gets too cold, and the AC if it gets too hot, always trying to hit that sweet spot.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
And reinforcing loops are the ones that amplify change.
Right.
This is where things can really get out of control, right?
Right.
Like more people lead to more births, which leads to even more people.
Exactly.
That kind of thing.
Meadows calls this exponential growth.
Oh, okay.
It can be a good thing, like compound interest growing your savings,
Yeah.
or a not so good thing, like the spread of a virus.
Right.
Yeah.
Speaking of exponential growth, there's this really cool takeaway from the book that stuck with me.
Okay.
It's about doubling time.
Right. It says that the time it takes for something to double in size is roughly 70 divided by its growth rate.
Okay.
So if something's growing at 10% per year, it'll double in size in about 7 years.
Okay. But how does that apply to me, in the real world?
Think about the growth of online platforms.
Oh, right.
Say a new social media platform is growing at 20% per month.
Okay.
Using the rule of 70, we can estimate it'll double its user base in just 3.5 months.
Wow. That's incredibly fast.
Yeah.
No wonder things can feel so overwhelming these days.
Right.
It's a reminder that we need to pay attention to those growth rates because they can really sneak up on us.
It is, and that's a key insight of systems thinking. It helps us understand the long-term consequences of actions and how small changes can create huge effects down the line.
So we need to zoom out, see the bigger picture, think long term.
Yes.
But we've only just scratched the surface of systems thinking, haven't we?
Yeah.
I'm ready to go deeper.
Okay.
What else does Meadows have in store for us? All right, I'm ready for more.
Okay.
What's next on our systems thinking journey?
Let's talk about system archetypes.
Okay.
Meadows describes these as common patterns of behavior that pop up in all kinds of systems.
Okay.
And they can be both traps and opportunities.
Okay, so like patterns that lead to predictable outcomes.
Exactly.
I'm all about spotting patterns.
And sometimes these patterns can lead us into situations where we keep trying to fix a problem, but just end up making it worse.
Right.
Meadows calls these system traps.
So like that Groundhog Day scenario.
Yes.
Where you're stuck repeating the same mistake over and over again.
Yeah.
I've definitely felt that in my work sometimes.
We all have. One of the most common ones is what she calls fixes that fail.
Oh, okay.
It's that classic trap where a quick fix seems to work in the short term,
Right.
but actually backfires down the road.
Okay, give me an example.
Okay.
I need to see this in action.
Imagine a city struggling with traffic congestion.
Okay.
The obvious solution seems to be to widen the roads, right?
Yeah.
More lanes, more space for cars. Problem solved.
Logical.
Yeah.
So what's the trap?
Well, in the short term, it might ease congestion a bit.
Okay.
But here's the catch.
Okay.
Wider roads often encourage more people to drive, which eventually fills up those new lanes and leads to even worse congestion than before.
Ah, I see.
Yeah.
It's like when they add a lane to the freeway.
Right.
And everyone's excited for about a week, and then it's just as bad as it was before.
Exactly. Meadows points out that we often fall into this trap because we focus on addressing the symptom, the traffic,
Right.
without tackling the underlying structure of the system.
So instead of just widening roads, what's a more systems thinking approach to tackling traffic congestion?
It might involve investing in public transportation, encouraging biking and walking, or even implementing congestion pricing to incentivize people to drive less during peak hours.
Oh, interesting.
It's about shifting the system towards a more sustainable solution, not just patching up the problem with a temporary fix.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this works.
Okay.
So fixes that fail.
Yeah.
Check.
Right.
What other system traps should we be on the lookout for?
Another big one is the tragedy of the commons.
Okay.
Which explains how shared resources can get depleted when everyone acts in their own self-interest.
This is the one about the grazing pasture, right?
It's the one.
Each herder keeps adding more cattle because they figure, hey, if I don't, someone else will.
And it seems perfectly rational from an individual perspective.
Right.
But when everyone does it, the pasture gets overgrazed, the land degrades, and eventually nobody can graze their cattle there anymore. Everyone loses.
It's a sobering example of how short-term thinking and a lack of collective action can lead to disastrous consequences.
Right.
Are there any modern-day examples of this playing out?
Unfortunately, yes. Think of overfishing in the oceans.
Okay.
Each fishing boat wants to maximize their catch.
Right.
But if everyone keeps fishing at unsustainable rates, entire fish populations can collapse, ultimately harming the entire fishing industry.
So what's the way out of this trap? How do we prevent the commons from being tragically depleted?
Meadows highlights two main approaches.
Okay.
One is privatization, dividing up the commons into individually owned plots so people bear the full responsibility for their actions.
Okay.
If you overgraze your own land, you're the one who suffers the consequences.
It creates that direct feedback loop that incentivizes responsible behavior.
Exactly.
What's the other approach?
It's regulation, establishing clear rules and limits to prevent overuse and ensure the long-term sustainability of the resource. Think of fishing quotas, hunting permits, or even emissions caps to address climate change.
Okay, so it's about establishing those feedback mechanisms, whether through individual ownership or collective rules, to prevent the system from collapsing under its own weight.
Exactly. Now, shifting gears a bit, let's talk about another archetype that can be particularly insidious: shifting the burden to the intervener.
Ooh, that sounds juicy.
Yeah.
Tell me more.
This trap highlights what happens when we rely on external fixes to address a problem without addressing the root cause.
So kind of like putting a bandage on a bullet wound.
Yeah.
Treating the symptom but ignoring the real issue.
That's a good analogy. Think about our reliance on painkillers.
Okay.
If you have a headache, taking a pill might provide temporary relief,
Right.
But it doesn't address the underlying cause of the headache, which could be stress dehydration or even a more serious medical condition.
Right, so you become reliant on the painkillers, maybe even increase your dosage over time without ever dealing with the real problem.
Precisely. And that reliance on the external fix can actually weaken the system's own ability to heal itself.
Yeah.
In the case of painkillers, your body might become less adept at managing pain naturally.
Okay, so how does this shifting the burden trap play out in larger systems?
Imagine a company that's constantly struggling to meet its sales targets. Instead of addressing the underlying issues that might be hindering sales, like poor product quality or ineffective marketing, they resort to offering discounts and promotions to boost sales in the short term.
But that eats into their profits and creates a dependence on those short-term tactics, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
They're shifting the burden to those quick fixes without investing in the long-term strategies that could fundamentally improve their sales performance.
So it's a bit like those fixes that fail we talked about earlier.
Yes.
Addressing the symptom without tackling the root cause.
You got it.
Yeah.
And the way out of this trap is similar as well. Shifting the focus from short-term relief to long-term solutions.
Right.
It's about empowering the system to heal itself rather than relying on those external crutches.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Now I'm curious, are there any system traps that relate specifically to how we measure success?
Great question. And that brings us to seeking the wrong goal.
Okay.
This trap highlights how our choice of metrics, our definition of success, can actually incentivize the wrong behaviors and lead to unintended consequences.
Oh, this one feels particularly relevant in today's data-driven world.
Yes.
We're always talking about KPIs and metrics, but what if we're measuring the wrong things?
Exactly. Meadows uses the example of GNP. Gross national product, as a measure of national progress. It's a commonly used metric, but it doesn't account for things like environmental health, social well-being, or even happiness.
Right. A country could have a sky-high GNP while its citizens are miserable and the environment is being destroyed.
Precisely. And focusing solely on GNP can lead to policies that prioritize economic growth at all costs, even if it comes at the expense of other important factors.
So we might be achieving the stated goal, higher GNP, but failing to achieve the true desired outcome, a thriving and sustainable society.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about stepping back and asking ourselves, are we measuring what truly matters? Are our goals aligned with the real well-being of the system?
Wow, this is making me rethink how I measure success in my own life.
Okay.
Maybe those metrics I've been obsessing over aren't the most important ones after all. So how do we avoid falling into this trap of seeking the wrong goal?
It's about taking a more holistic approach to measurement. Instead of just focusing on those easily quantifiable metrics, we need to consider the broader impact of our actions. Are we creating a system that is sustainable, equitable, and conducive to human flourishing?
It's about aligning our goals with our values, isn't it? Yes. Making sure we're striving for something that truly reflects what we care about. This is really thought-provoking stuff.
Okay.
I'm starting to see how these system traps can play out in all areas of life.
Right.
But I'm also curious about how we can use systems thinking to not just identify problems, but also find solutions.
Yeah.
Is that where leverage points come in?
Yes.
Okay, so we've explored all these system traps.
Right.
It feels a bit like we've been diagnosing a patient with a whole bunch of ailments.
Yeah.
But now I'm ready for the treatment plan.
Okay.
How do we actually go about shifting systems in a positive direction?
Yeah.
Is that where leverage points come in?
You got it. Leverage points are those places within a system where a small intervention can create a big impact.
Okay.
It's like finding the right pressure point to release tension in the whole body.
So where do we find these magical pressure points within a system? Does Meadows provide a map or something?
She does. She actually outlines 12 levels of leverage points.
Whoa, okay.
Starting with those that offer the least leverage and working up to the most powerful.
Okay.
It's kind of like a hierarchy of effectiveness.
Okay. I'm intrigued.
Yeah.
Let's start at the bottom of the pyramid.
Okay.
What are those interventions that we often try, but that maybe aren't as effective as we think?
That would be what she calls numbers.
Okay.
Those constants, parameters, subsidies, standards, the things we typically tinker with when trying to fix a system.
Okay.
Think of tweaking tax rates,
Okay.
setting quotas, or adjusting interest rates.
So those are the levers we tend to reach for first.
Right.
Because they seem easy to change and control.
Yeah.
But why don't they always create the lasting change we're hoping for?
Because we're often just fiddling with the symptoms rather than addressing the underlying structure of the system.
Right. It's like trying to lower a fever without treating the infection that's causing it.
That's a good analogy.
Yeah. It might provide temporary relief, but it doesn't get to the root of the problem.
Right.
So what's a step up from there?
Moving up the ladder, we have buffers, the size of those stabilizing stocks within a system.
Okay.
Think of water reservoirs, grain reserves, or even a company's cash reserves.
So these are like the shock absorbers that help systems weather those inevitable storms.
Exactly. A larger buffer can provide greater stability and resilience.
Okay.
Like a city with a large reservoir is less vulnerable to drought.
Makes sense.
But Meadows also cautions that excessively large buffers can make a system rigid and less adaptable.
Oh, okay. So it's about finding that Goldilocks zone.
Right.
Not too big, not too small.
Yeah.
That balances stability with flexibility.
Exactly.
What comes after buffers?
Next up is the structure of the system.
Okay.
The physical layout, the interconnections, the feedback loops.
Okay.
This is essentially the system's architecture.
So if we're sticking with the body analogy, this would be like the skeletal system, the circulatory system, the way all the parts are arranged and connected.
Precisely. And changing the structure of a system can create huge shifts in behavior.
Okay.
But it's also often difficult and expensive to do.
Right.
Especially once a system is already in place.
Yeah.
That's why it's not as high on the leverage point list as you might think.
Makes sense. It's easier to design a well-structured system from the start than to try to rearrange the bones later on.
Right.
So what comes after structure?
We have delays.
Right.
The time it takes for information to flow through a system or for actions to have an effect.
Delays.
Yeah.
We talked earlier about how those sneaky delays can throw a wrench into things.
Yes.
So how can we leverage those delays?
It's not so much about leveraging them as it is about understanding them.
Okay.
Systems with long delays are harder to control and predict. So the key is to be aware of those delays and factor them into our decision making.
So if you know there's a long delay between an action and its effect, you need to be extra careful and maybe even take a more cautious approach. It's about being patient and recognizing that change might take time.
Exactly. Now let's move into the realm of feedback loops.
Okay.
We've already talked about how crucial they are to system behavior.
Right. Those balancing loops that maintain stability and those reinforcing loops that amplify change.
Right.
So are those feedback loops considered leverage points?
They are. Meadows says that strengthening balancing feedback loops can make a system more resilient.
Okay.
It's like giving those stabilizing forces a boost.
So if you want to keep a system within a healthy range, you need to make sure those balancing loops are working effectively.
Yes.
Got it. What about reinforcing loops?
Yeah.
Those seem like they could be high leverage given their ability to create those exponential effects.
They can be, but they need to be managed carefully.
Okay.
Meadows points out that the most powerful leverage point often lies in slowing down or speeding up existing reinforcing loops.
It's about understanding which loops are driving the system in a desirable direction.
Right.
And which ones are leading to unintended consequences.
Right. Exactly.
And then finding ways to either dampen or amplify them accordingly.
Precisely. Now let's move on to a leverage point that feels particularly potent in today's world, information flows.
Okay.
Who has access to what information and how that information is shared?
This one feels especially relevant in the digital age, doesn't it?
It is.
We're bombarded with information from all directions.
Meadows argues that transparency is key.
Okay.
When information flows freely, it empowers people to make informed decisions and hold institutions accountable.
Okay.
Think about the role of investigative journalism in exposing corruption,
Yeah.
or the power of social media in mobilizing social movements.
But we've also seen how information can be manipulated, distorted, and used to spread misinformation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's why media literacy and critical thinking skills are more important than ever.
Right.
We need to be able to discern between reliable sources and those that are spreading propaganda or falsehoods.
So being mindful of information flows, both the good and the bad, is crucial for understanding how systems operate and for identifying those leverage points for change.
Exactly.
Okay, what comes next on our leverage point ladder?
Moving on up, we have rules.
Okay.
The incentives, punishments, and constraints that shape behavior within a system.
Okay.
Think of laws, regulations, social norms.
Okay.
Even those unwritten rules that guide our actions.
So these are the boundaries that define what's acceptable and unacceptable within a system.
Exactly. And Meadows points out that changing the rules can be a highly effective way to shift a system's behavior.
Okay.
Think about how enacting environmental regulations can incentivize companies to reduce pollution, or how implementing progressive tax policies can promote greater economic equity.
Right. Those rules create the framework within which the system operates.
Right.
But changing rules can also be challenging, can it?
Yes.
There are often vested interests that benefit from the existing rules and will resist change.
Absolutely. That's why understanding those power dynamics is crucial for effectively leveraging this level of intervention. It might involve building coalitions, mobilizing public support, and finding strategic allies to push for those rule changes.
Okay, so it's not just about identifying the right leverage point. It's also about understanding the context, the power dynamics, and the potential resistance you might encounter.
Exactly.
What's next on our list?
Next up is self-organization.
Okay.
The ability of a system to change its own structure,
Okay.
to learn, adapt, and evolve over time.
This one speaks to the inherent creativity and resilience of living systems, doesn't it?
It does.
Think of how ecosystems evolve and adapt to changing environments.
Yeah.
Or how social movements emerge and gain momentum.
Precisely. And Meadows emphasizes the importance of fostering conditions that allow for self-organization to flourish.
Okay.
This might involve promoting diversity, encouraging experimentation, and creating spaces for open dialogue and collaboration.
It's about trusting in the system's ability to find its own solutions, isn't it?
It is.
To innovate and evolve in response to new challenges and opportunities.
But she also cautions that self-organization needs some guidance.
Okay.
If we just let systems evolve without any constraints, they might not necessarily evolve in a way that benefits everyone or aligns with our values.
Right. It's about being conscious co-creators with the system, nurturing its ability to self-organize while also providing those nudges and boundaries to ensure it's moving in a direction that serves the greater good.
Exactly. Now we're getting to the top of the leverage point pyramid.
Ooh, okay.
And here we move from the tangible to the intangible, from structures and rules to mindsets and beliefs.
This is where things get really interesting.
Yes.
So what's the next level of leverage?
It's goals.
Oh,
Like the purpose or function of the system.
Okay.
We've already touched on how powerful goals can be.
Right.
They set the direction, the driving force behind a system's behavior.
Right. And if we're seeking the wrong goals we discussed earlier, that can lead us down a very unproductive path.
Exactly.
So how do we leverage goals to shift a system in a more desirable direction?
It's about aligning those goals with our values.
Okay.
Ensuring that what we're striving for as a system truly reflects what we care about as individuals and as a society.
I can see how that would be a powerful leverage point.
Yeah.
It's like changing the destination that you've programmed into your GPS.
Right.
It will completely change the route you take.
Yes.
But shifting goals can also be incredibly challenging, right?
Absolutely.
It often requires a change in mindset,
Yeah.
a reevaluation of our priorities.
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
It might involve questioning deeply held beliefs about the role of government, the purpose of education, or even the meaning of success.
Right. It's about engaging in those difficult conversations,
Yeah.
those explorations of our values that can lead to a collective shift in consciousness. Okay, I'm ready for the top of the pyramid.
Okay.
It's the ultimate leverage point.
Meadows calls it paradigms.
Okay.
Those underlying mindsets, those worldviews
Yeah.
that shape the way we see the world and the systems we create.
So these are those deeply ingrained beliefs,
Yeah.
those often unspoken assumptions about how things work
Right.
that influence everything we do.
Precisely. Think of the paradigm that sees nature as a resource to be exploited,
Okay.
or the paradigm that values competition over collaboration.
Right. Those paradigms are like the operating system that runs in the background, shaping all our thoughts and action.
Exactly. And Meadows suggests that changing paradigms is incredibly difficult,
Yeah.
but also incredibly powerful.
Right.
It's about shifting those fundamental beliefs, those core assumptions about reality.
Okay.
It's about questioning the unquestionable.
It sounds almost like a spiritual awakening.
It can be.
A sudden realization that the way you've been seeing the world isn't the only way or even the right way.
And she points out that paradigm shifts often occur when the old paradigm starts to break down,
Okay.
when it no longer explains the world we're experiencing.
So it's about highlighting those inconsistencies, those cracks in the old story,
Yeah.
and offering a new narrative, a new way of seeing things that can encompass those complexities.
Precisely. And sometimes those paradigm shifts happen gradually.
Yeah.
through a process of education dialogue and exposure to new ideas. And sometimes they happen more abruptly through those moments of insight or crisis that shake us out of our old ways of thinking.
Wow. This whole concept of leverage points is incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
It really gives us a framework for thinking about how to create meaningful change in the world. But I'm also sensing a note of caution here.
Okay.
It feels like messing with these leverage points, especially those higher level ones, could have unintended consequences if we're not careful.
You're absolutely right. Meadows emphasizes that systems thinking is not about control.
Okay.
It's not about finding the one right lever to pull to make everything perfect.
Right.
It's about understanding the interconnectedness of things, recognizing the potential for unintended consequences, and approaching change with humility and a willingness to learn and adapt as we go.
So it's not about finding the right answer. It's about asking the right questions, staying curious, and being open to new information as we navigate the complexities of these systems we're a part of.
Exactly. And ultimately, it's about recognizing that we're all part of these systems, and we have the power to influence them for better or worse.
This has been an amazing deep dive into thinking in systems.
Yeah, it's a great book.
It's really opened my eyes to a whole new way of seeing the world and understanding how things work. I feel equipped with a powerful set of tools for navigating complexity, identifying leverage points, and approaching change with a more systems-aware mindset.
I'm so glad to hear that. And remember, systems thinking is not just a set of concepts, it's a practice. It's about constantly observing, questioning, and seeking to understand the interconnectedness of things.
So to our listeners, as you go out into the world today, try putting on your systems thinking glasses. Notice those feedback loops, those delays, those unintended consequences. Think about those leverage points. And ask yourself, where can I make a difference? How can I nudge the systems I'm a part of towards a more just sustainable and thriving future?
And one final thought to leave you with, remember, you are a part of the system. Your actions, your choices, your voice, they all matter.